top of the hour, we'll keep on top of the news.
It's the most important thing we can do.
On today's News Talk, TNT Radio.
And welcome back to the Patrick Henningsen Show. With me, Basil Valentine, sitting in for Patrick today, Tuesday the 16th of July. Well, it's all happening over in Milwaukee, unless you're Boris Johnson, of course. He's flown all that way to address an empty ballroom, as we can see now in this picture. Humiliation for Boris. Nobody's really interested in anything he's got to say, nor should they be. Liz Truss and Nigel Farage are also attending the convention, but it had not been known that Johnson was travelling to the Wisconsin city. It seems that this Vapor Technology Association, an American lobbying organization for vapes, are sponsoring the event that Johnson was speaking at, and just a dozen or so people came to hear him speak at the Pfister Hotel, despite more than 50,000 being in Milwaukee for the event. It couldn't have happened to a worse bloke, could it, Tony?
Well, it's because he's got no guts. When he was bullied out, as Nadine Dorries has very well explained in her expose of the coup against Boris Johnson, he had a choice, really. He could either continue to say things which would be controversial as an insider working for the public on TV and in the newspapers, but he decided to keep stum, and this is what he's been doing ever since. And he's not really revealed anything interesting much through his newspaper column. And so, yeah, he's an obedient little gopher for the deep state, Boris is. On the other side of the Atlantic, you've got someone who's rather different. Now, Trump is, I'm not saying he's just rooting for the public. He's obviously rooting for himself as well. But, when all these attempts are made to get rid of him in the last, whether or not that was fairly done with the votes in the last presidential election, he just came out fighting. Now, Boris has not. He's just bent over, basically, and he's decided to give up. But he still wants to have all the kind of trappings of some sort of major personality that's fighting for the public. But that's why he's got nobody there. It's because the guy is not. Everyone knows the guy's not going to say anything interesting because he's kowtowing to the deep state, just as he did when he scuppered the peace talks in Ukraine and led to hundreds of thousands of unnecessary deaths.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and of course that's in stark contrast to both Trump and now his new number two, J.D. Vance, who reiterated that Trump will bring the war to an end very quickly after taking office. I mean, that puts the pair of them really on collision course with with NATO, with the European Union, von der Leyen, with Keir Starmer, with the entire so-called security apparatus of the West. And it's a high-stakes game, couldn't really be higher. I think it's hilarious the way Trump has derided Zelensky as a con man, able to go to Washington for a few days and leave with $60 billion. I mean, I think Trump was ironically very impressed by that. But on a serious note, he wasn't allowed to win in 2020. It's as simple as that. Only certain people are ever allowed to become president of the United States. Hence all the gerrymandering and vote rigging that went on to make sure that Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden were the candidates in 2016 and 2020 and not Bernie Sanders, for all his faults. I'm not a huge Sanders fan, but nevertheless, he was not allowed to win the nomination. Simple as that. Trump somehow managed to slip through the net, then ended up filling his cabinet with neocons like John Bolton and Mike Pompeo, two of the very worst people in Washington. But this time round, people have been saying he looks like he's learned a lot. Do you think he and Vance are up to standing up to NATO and the international warmongers?
Yeah, I think they are. And I think it's largely because of what happened 5 years ago, that Trump has, I think now, he's got it in for the deep state. He's been fighting them right the way through these court cases. And by the way, this may not be the last assassination attempt on Trump. I think looking at his running mate, both of them have put it on the record that they don't want to be fighting European wars. And they don't want to be, basically, that what they're saying is they're sort of backing out of being the leaders in NATO, which really starts to beg the question, doesn't it? Who's in charge of this Anglo-Zionist empire? I mean, everyone's always asking, is this Israel? Is it the UK? Is it the EU? Is it the Washington? Well, it may be that Washington starts to back away from this alliance. And that's, I think, the thing that the Europeans are really afraid of. The Israelis are really afraid of. The Russians are looking at this and thinking, yeah, go for it, guys, because we don't actually want to have a war with Europe either. And we certainly don't want to do that with the Americans backing it. But I mean, I'm not joking when I say possibly another assassination attempt, maybe more successful this time, because my reading of what happened on Saturday night, late Saturday night our time, is pretty simple. That is to say, access. So having access to a shooting position to kill the president with a rifle is absolutely not on. And anybody who's in charge of the Secret Services should immediately resign because this guy got access to it. I mean, first of all, you pick sites where there is limited access, and then you make sure all of that access to a shooting position is covered 100%. That's your basic job as the boss of the Secret Service. But the other thing is, no action. There were warnings. There were shouts from the crowd. There were police and Secret Services communicating. I don't know if you've seen that bit of footage. There was obviously some alarm going on about a minute or so before the shooting around the stage by the Secret Service. And at that point, it seems to me somebody made a completely wrong decision to allow Trump to carry on. Now, as soon as they'd heard there was a potential shooter in the area, it would have been very simple, professional decision to pause the proceedings, wait until that potential had been cleared up. Even if it may have been a false alarm, still completely fine. Just pause proceedings, get Trump out of the way, find out what's going on. But that didn't happen. So there was a warning about this, and there was no action. I mean, Trump is quite right when he says I should be dead, and I think this is quite a miracle, really, a minor miracle that he's managed to survive this. I mean, people have pointed out, oh well, that if they wanted to kill him, of course they'd do it. Look, the guy was not a very good aim. He wasn't particularly good. He wasn't even allowed in the rifle club. I think maybe he was allowed in it, but he wasn't considered to be in any way a useful or effective marksman. Whereas anyone that knows anything about the JFK assassination and the role of the Chicago mob, James Files, the hitman who was trained by the 82nd Airborne Division as a sniper in Korea and then went on to work for the mob in Chicago, was brought down to Dallas and fired that fatal shot from the grassy knoll. At least that's certainly what anyone that really bothers to look deeply into this can see. Files is still alive, by the way. I've been trying to get through to him. It'd be lovely to get an interview with him. I bet he's got all sorts of interesting things to say about this. But the fact is that was a hitman, a marksman, a real professional doing the JFK job. This guy was 20 years old. I mean, he's a hothead, and so that to me is Thomas Crook's chap. The other aspect to all of this, Basil, is this woman Kimberly Cheetle, the head of the Secret Service. She said that they didn't want to have anybody on that roof, and it wasn't necessary to cover it because it was a sloping roof, and that it's dangerous, health and safety, dangerous for the Secret Service people to be on there. Now, it's a gentle slope. This is the sort of thing. This is a tick box individual. Kimberly Cheetle should be gone. She should be possibly even jailed for the negligence that she's caused here. And also, you have to ask the question, has she been given this job because she's Kimberly Cheetle, the box ticker, or because she's actually good at close protection? And I would suggest it's largely to do with she's a woman, she's a box ticker, she fulfills the equality criteria, and nothing whatsoever to do with actually being suitable for the job.
Well, I mean, she's confessed that she didn't do her job. She was interviewed by ABC just today. The building in particular has a sloped roof at its highest point. And so, there's a safety factor that would be considered there, that we wouldn't want to put somebody up on a sloped roof. And so, the decision was made to secure the building from inside. That's a verbatim quote. But the building wasn't secured from inside. It's absolutely ludicrous. I mean, surely even if you take her at her word, which is obvious nonsense, because the Secret Service people are capable of standing on sloped roofs. Any workman's capable of standing on a sloped roof. Even so, somebody should have gone onto the roof or viewed the roof. They've got drones. They've got, it's a total failure. She's confessed there to total failure. She should be gone immediately, Tony. I don't get it.
Yeah, she should. I mean, absolutely no way that anybody like that. And it's, pathetically, she's blaming the local, is it Pennsylvania cops or something? But look, there's a whole nother aspect to this, very important aspect, and that is this political climate where somebody thinks it's okay to do this sort of thing, and the general criticism of Biden has mostly been lampooning him, making fun of him, and turning him into this sort of fun figure. On the other side, the Democrats and their friends over here in the UK and other parts of the world, the woke brigade, if you want, have been really bad at demonizing Trump. Now, look, I mean, obviously, somebody with his amount of power, he's made lots of bad decisions, particularly to do with Jerusalem and Israel, but lots and lots of them. But the thing is, whether you like it or not, he's got massive public support in the States, like Putin has in Russia. And what's been going on is there have been several attempts to literally to call for his execution, and saying things like the guy's a criminal, comparing him to Hitler. I'm sure you've seen those clips of the US TV presenters saying what Trump is saying is exactly what Hitler said. This is demonizing. Okay, so and saying he's a threat to democracy.
I mean, even Joe Biden himself said he wanted a bullseye on Trump,
Yeah, so
and David Aronovich.
If the public are being told that Trump is a threat to democracy, what you're doing is you're implanting this idea in people's minds that if they kill him, it's going to be better for democracy if we do that. So these sorts of things, I would suggest, under existing criminal law, are incitement to murder and shouldn't be allowed. Only under a satirical comic context, but these weren't. And we've seen various figures such as David Attenborough, very close.
David Aronovich,
King Charles, both of them, Aronovich and Attenborough. Yeah, right. I think it was back in around about 2015. There were headlines around the UK of David Attenborough saying that Trump should be murdered. He's such a threat to the planet. So this is the sort of thing we've been hearing again and again. Aronovich, as you said quite correctly, that was much more recently, just a couple of weeks ago, a week and a half ago. Yes. And he deleted his tweet. He's got his own series on the BBC, regularly speaking on Radio 4. Well, I'm not quite sure what it's called. I'd usually switch off as soon as I hear it because he is literally an Israeli agent. I mean, I know everyone uses this term independent journalist. I was brought up with freelance journalists. Now, these are journalists that can speak their mind a bit more freely because they do not have their backsides owned through a staff contract. So many staff,
or for that matter, by any external force like Mr. Aronovich.
Well, I'm not sure. I think he could be freelance too. I'm not sure. There's quite a lot of these people working at the BBC. They even set up their own companies so that they can not pay any tax through some sort of offshore in Jersey, things like that. The BBC have been shown to be paying money like that. So, but anyway, the point is also an investigative journalist. So I'm out there digging the whole time, looking for what's actually going on between the lines, behind the scenes, somewhere else. So constantly skeptical. You could say I was born suspicious. You could say that. So much of my work has been around digging up the links between the Nazis in the Second World War and this Fourth Reich industrial empire after the war, which we now see asserting itself as the deep state, effectively, the satanic banksters, I call them every week on my weekly podcast. But look, getting back to Trump, we've also seen, we're talking about David Aronovich on the BBC. I think it's called The Briefing Room, his program, where he's just lying to the entire country and sending everyone off in the wrong direction with his rubbish. and lies. Him calling for Trump to be killed, a tweet he then deleted. Yes. Also David Attenborough, friend of Prince Charles, saying that Trump was very bad for the planet, blah blah, and he should be killed. I don't know if he withdrew those comments, but all these sorts of things have not been coming the other way. Do you know what I mean? So what I'm saying is, generally from the right to the left, you're not getting people saying, "Oh, let's blow Biden's head off," but you are in New Zealand, even New Zealand TV, their independent channel, so commercial channel in New Zealand, their breakfast show last year had a whole segment where all the presenters, and I was watching it earlier, took turns to use a pop gun to knock over and shoot at a little model of Donald Trump on their desk. And they were all having a laugh and a joke. Listen, in broadcast, certainly when I was brought up in broadcasting, this is not, if it's put in the context of a comedy program, maybe, but not on your main news breakfast program. These are incitement to murder, incitement to assassinate. And that's why I think you've got we've what's happened over the decades, Basil, is we've slowly but surely gone to this kind of gutter media, in the national media. So these sorts of things are not immediately jumped on by journalists, because if those journalists do jump on those people making those, assassination, murder, incitement comments, they get sacked, they get elbowed out. So there's this kind of groupthink that, that woke is right, left is fair, and it's socialist, and it's all about equality. And actually, at the end of the day, that isn't necessarily. It's a very narrow part of what is right and what is wrong, and that's what is being pushed down our throats all the time, and particularly in the press. But I think they've done a reasonable job, a lot of them, in covering this. I've been looking, for example, at the Daily Telegraph. Here's coverage of the Trump assassination attempt, and as a right-wing paper, I suppose you'd expect them to be quite critical of it. But at the end of the day, I think what we're going to see is this making, this miracle, really, Trump surviving, is a serious threat to the transatlantic elite, their alliance, because now they're going to have to try and bump him off. And it's interesting, Tucker Carlson, in his interview with Vladimir Putin a couple of months ago, was also talking about, he's saying, well, they're going to have to assassinate Trump now because his court cases are failing. So Tucker Carlson should be being rerun. All these people who've predicted this, now, obviously, Carlson is not, wanting it, like Attenborough, Aronovich, and these New Zealand TV. I mean, I'm sure there are many others too, because it's become like open season on the Trumpites. Trump is terrible. Channel 4 News always having a go at Trump, any possible excuse, having little tittering behind their, So what it is, this is a kind of gangster system that we've brought up where the threats against Trump are very much like, you get a little letter, maybe the ace of spades comes through your door from the drug dealers saying, if you don't shut up and if you don't behave yourself, you're going to be a dead person. That is actually what's going on, I think, now through the mainstream press, has been going on against Trump. And of course, once it happens, the same exact thing, by the way, was going on with Diana. Lots and lots of people, not necessarily calling her to be killed, but also, but all of them demonizing her. There was massive amount of demonization. Private Eye published a whole thing about it when Diana was assassinated. A whole page of all the things that people have been saying the previous week about Diana, and all that. Load of the newspapers that morning had to be actually brought back and pulped and rewritten because they had so much horrible, sneaky, horrible. So this is what it seems the West does now. Whether it's Assad has to go, Gaddafi has to go, Putin has to go, Trump has to go, and then they get surprised when someone tries to blow his head off.
No, absolutely. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, first of all, we've had Trump in office for 4 years. The sky didn't fall in. In fact, the American economy prospered under Trump. Admittedly, the so-called deal of the century in the Middle East, that went nowhere, but it looks amazing now compared to the sheer horror on the ground there. And of course, he met Xi and, is willing to do diplomacy with standard of debate, including in the corporate press, has now become so low that any attempt at diplomacy is automatically branded appeasement. Trump obviously stands in opposition to that. You're right. The language headed in Trump's direction has been some of the worst ever. I wonder if he might decide to exercise that one-sided extradition agreement that the United States has with the UK with respect to Mr. Aronovich in particular, and pull him over to the United States once he's running the Department of Justice again to face charges for incitement to murder.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what the BBC does with Aronovich. Probably nothing, because they like to just shrug these things off. Oh, well, it was just a joke. Yeah, really? And then it happened, and the guy was nearly killed. But you don't care because you don't believe what he stands for. These organisations are supposed to be impartial. And in fact, we had a lot of fun back in the early 1990s being impartial. That is to say, in the time of the first Gulf War, actually getting somebody on the radio who was megally pro Saddam Hussein. He actually lived around the corner from the radio station I was working at in Marylebone High Street in central London. And we got him on the radio, and there he was singing the praises of the guys that the British had just sent off a flotilla or something to go and invade in the first Gulf War. So you know that's impartiality, and I don't think we've got that anymore. We've got this.
No, certainly not. I mean, we're not even allowed to watch RT. We're not even allowed to watch RT. You've got to use a proxy server to get it in the UK. I mean, it's absolutely disgraceful the way the corporate media has become simply a stenographer for government. And you say that, you know, organs like The Guardian, which used to be fiercely independent and an opponent of the deep state, but now really seems to be just a mouthpiece for the security services, they embrace some aspects of the left, in other words, the wokery, but they don't embrace the meaningful aspects of the left, like peace, or for that matter, renationalizing the water boards that pump sewage into our rivers, Tony. So it's very selective, the new ideology, you could call it, of neoliberal fascism.
Well, yeah, it is fascism, and it's a Fourth Reich. I think it's quite clear. It's quite clear observing this sort of thing that the private equity firms are quite in a position to control everything. They've bought the political parties through groups like the World Economic Forum and the Trilateral Commission. They have completely own the backside of our Prime Minister over here. Declassified UK have been doing some excellent work exposing his links to the deep state. And so the other thing is that the private equity know how to do things. So they own anything that opposes them, they buy it up. Look at what's been going on with the water privatisation. Back in the 1990s, it was quite a late privatisation. I think it was under the Major government or the tail end of the Thatcher government. The first thing that happened when water was privatised here in Britain, and of course, the more you privatise, the less your vote means. So you're voting for something which is a puny little regulator, which is trying to rein in these massive corporations. That's all you're voting for. You're not voting for the ownership and control of these things anymore. And the first thing that happened was something called the Camelford water disaster. Within a couple of months of the privatisation of water in Britain, we had some guy from a private company dump a whole load of toxic aluminium chemicals into the water supply, which knocked out hundreds of people in the area, gave them life-changing, some of them were killed, life-changing injuries, So that should be an example to every other thing that the water...
Now, just hold that thought, Tony, because we've got to go to a quick break, and I want to talk about BlackRock and the connection between Thomas Crooks and BlackRock, and how on earth he became a potential person of suspicion. And for that, we're going to be joined by Hesher Bryan McClain to get really granular on exactly what happened last Saturday. We'll be right back after the short break.
Political commentator and investigative journalist. You're with Patrick Henningsen on today's News Talk, TNT.
Except you're with Basil Valentine today, Tuesday, the 16th of July, 2024. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined for this final segment by Bryan Hesher McClain, host of State of the Nation, which comes up after the news at the top of the hour. But while we've got the three of us together, let's finally get granular on Thomas Crooks. Tony was talking before the break, Hesher, about the private equity firms, the likes of Vanguard and BlackRock, how they own everything these days. Do they own Thomas Crooks? Apparently he appeared in a BlackRock advert, and he was also identified as a potential person of suspicion, according to Kimberly Cheetle, who is masquerading as director of the Secret Service. given that he was just a sort of rather bullied, otherwise unknown high school graduate, known for being a bit geeky and highly intelligent, how on earth could he be a person of suspicion to the Secret Service? And is this connection with BlackRock of any particular significance, do you think?
It should be. I mean, it's definitely a big red flag. It's not the first time we've seen things like this, too, and, again, it goes from this is an unknown person to a person of interest. OK, so just like, many situations in the past, it went from lone wolf to known wolf within, 36 hours of the event. So that should be a giant red flag. We've seen that pattern over and over again with highly politicized shootings, assassinations, and attempts at assassinations, school shootings, movie theater shootings. We see this over and over again. And of course, who's going to investigate it? The FBI. And who's the outlet that seems to almost always be just right there in that lone wolf to known wolf inflection point? We've seen that over and over again, going all the way back to, at least Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The Department of Homeland Security, which now oversees the Secret Service, is denying claims by the Trump campaign that they'd requested greater resources for his personal protection, requests that were repeatedly denied. We know that Biden has personally, as far as we can gather, vetoed requests by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. For protection. So in this case, do you think there's a possibility that this was allowed to happen, Tony? Cock-up or conspiracy?
No, I think that what happens nowadays, it's not so easy to control as it was in the 1960s with the JFK assassination. That was the CIA and the Chicago mob doing things rather, covertly undercover. I think there's a lot of people now in the government and in the secret services, etc., that know how things work. So it's very difficult to use these big organizations like the FBI to directly to carry out these assassinations. Cock up or conspiracy, definitely. What they do, I think, is they allow little windows of opportunity. They insert somebody that might be able to do the job. This guy wasn't a particularly good sharpshooter, so I think that's why we've still got Trump around. But it seems obvious to me in every single way that somebody, probably the person on the scene from the Secret Service or the FBI, from the national government, has made sure that there was that opportunity for the guy to get to that position. It seems very, very, very surprised if it was just an oversight. So I think that's what they do nowadays, that they will make a little chink in the armor, open up the armor a little bit and say, well, if someone wants to get in there, some other part of the deep state might organise for somebody to be encouraged to do it. May even be this lad's parents saying, we hate Trump, here's your big chance, blah, blah. You don't know. I'm not accusing them directly of it, but these are the sort of questions that the police, the FBI, etc., should be asking. But of course, what we're saying, as you can see, what I'm saying is the FBI are investigating themselves in this sort of case. Now, they're not going to find themselves guilty. The government's not going to find itself guilty. And the reason they're so afraid of Trump is because he's made it absolutely clear that he is going to clear up these various parts of the deep state, which are the permanent government, the security state, the securocrats. He's getting in there to put his people in charge of these organizations and or close them down. Things like Department for Homeland Security, the FBI. As you know, at the 9/11, John O'Neill, the deputy director of the FBI, who'd resigned and got a job in the World Trade Center because he was trying to get bin Laden and people who were working with bin Laden in the United States under surveillance, and he was vetoed from doing that. So he said, well, I may as well resign. What's the point of me being deputy director of the FBI if we can't look at these people who seem to be planning some sort of massive attack in Britain and in the United States and are working with bin Laden to do it? So you see, what you've got is totally compromised institutions, part of the permanent government. That's what I call them anyway, the civil servants. And if you come back to the UK, there's even the recent new director of GCHQ, our version of the National Security Agency here in Britain, is this woman with some rather dubious qualifications for the job. And I have to look at that and say, well, look, hang on, you've not got very good qualifications for the job. Is it because they need to tick box all these, they must have enough women in these key positions, and that is taking priority over whether people can actually do it. Now, I'm not accusing her of doing, actually being not competent. Maybe she is, but these are the sorts of questions I think we've really got to be asking at the moment about whether people are getting into positions because they are pliable, and also the excuse to get them in there is this whole equalities agenda. Now, forgotten in the whole equalities world and agenda is whether people are megally poor and they're getting money, they're having to go to food banks to feed their family. That, to me, is what equality is all about: equality of opportunity and equality of at least having a roof over your head, something to drink, and a decent, reasonable income. So all of these things, I think, are linked together. As society's breaking down with this fascistic Fourth Reich financial takeover in the West, so what we're seeing is all those big institutions, the powerful institutions, elite institutions like the FBI, like the banking regulators, if you want to go as far as to say the water regulators in Britain, they're all being compromised. People are being put in there who've got no real interest in the public that they're supposed to serve. They're just box tickers, careerists, and hopefully. The thing is, at least with an election, you can get rid of people. You can get rid of somebody like we've just done here in Bristol with one of our awful MPs, Thangam Debonair. Now, thank God she's gone. But within the permanent government, it's much more difficult to do that.
Hesher, Tony makes a couple of interesting points there. A lot of people are saying the febrile atmosphere of American politics contributed to the radicalization of Thomas Crooks, all sorts of rumors around him, including, of course, that he might be a Manchurian candidate, an MK Ultra victim, shades of Mark David Chapman and the John Lennon assassination. What do we know about Crooks? And apparently he was a terrible shot. He seems an unlikely candidate for this. There have been several other unlikely candidates for shootings in America in recent years, some of which we're not allowed to mention.
Yeah, you might get sued for billions or trillions of dollars if you say some of them to the wrong people at the wrong time with a large enough audience. Alex Jones could tell us all about that, how that worked out for him. And I think Tony's really onto something here, and we've got examples of this. You can look at the Biden administration picking Philip Washington as their FAA lead. They wanted to put him, they specifically handpicked him and wanted to put him in as the head of the FAA. And he was under multiple federal investigations, state investigations, indictments, so why would an administration pick someone like that? And he had no experience. He did not have the experience for the job. And if you don't believe me, just watch his interview in the Senate confirmation hearing, which, thank goodness, good journalists got a hold of people like Ted Cruz and shared all this information with him. And all this stuff was brought out on the floor, and he was not confirmed to the position. The Biden administration did the same thing with Karen Bass, mayor of Los Angeles. She was a very dubious position, and Biden and Kamala flew out there to stump for her in particular. You kind of wonder, aren't you guys supposed to be running the country? Why are you so interested in who, the people of LA vote in for the mayor? I've got a long list of these. So I think it provides a whole lot of plausible deniability when things go wrong. Look how many Boeings have fallen out of the air. Look how many tires have popped during takeoff. Look how many, they're having all kinds of problems with airplanes right now. And wouldn't it just be great for the political environment and the polarization to say, to have Phil Washington be in there, so. Same with LA. Look at LA. It's got the worst homelessness. There's 70,000 to 100,000 homeless people in LA right now. And these are the leads that this administration has put in there. So they're definitely putting in people that are compromised legally, people that are in legal trouble, some of them under indictments and investigations. And one really has to ask themselves, why would our administration be trying to find people like that and promoting them into head positions? And that leads to Mrs. Cheetos, or whatever her name is, over here at Secret Service. Where did she work before? You would think that the head of Secret Service would have been, a colonel, or at least like a tier 1, pipe hitting veteran or something like that. But no, it's a security person from Pepsi.
No, that's absolutely bizarre. I agree. It's quite obvious why she got the job. It's being reported that European politicians and diplomats are extremely concerned about J.D. Vance being vice presidential pick. He's known for his criticism of American aid to Ukraine, and that Europe should get ready for the US pivoting its area of focus to East Asia. Tony, both of you, do you think that there's going to be another attempt on Trump? There have been rumors about assassination attempts on Trump for some time now. And, frankly, this chap, Mr. Crooks, he was an extremely unlikely candidate if he'd been set up by somebody.
No, I mean, I don't see him as unlikely. I mean, he's exactly the sort of person. I mean, the sort of 19, 20, 21-year-olds are real hotheads. I mean, the people like that, that's why they recruit them in their late teens, into the armed forces, because they know these people will go out and risk everything. That they see themselves as sort of young pioneers that can do the stuff that those old people can't do. They're also a little bit naive, can I say, about their own. That getting car insurance for a 18, 19-year-old in this country anyway is almost impossible. You're talking about £3,000-4,000 because they take lots of risks, and he is the sort of age where he will be taking risks. Somebody like James Files at the JFK assassination, he was much older, quite a bit older, in his 30s, I think. But, he's the sort of person who knew exactly the risk he was taking. In fact, he would choose his own position or where to fire from, knew exactly how he was going to retreat. If anyone had approached him, whether he'd kill them or just walk past them, that sort of thing. He was a hitman. He knew he'd been doing this for years and years for the Chicago mob. So I think he's a very likely candidate. The other thing is, I do feel obviously quite sorry for the guy. He's a bit of a loner, it seems. He didn't make friends very easily, and he was very intelligent. He wasn't really much liked. And I can totally sympathise with that. I think, for a lot of youngsters, particularly growing up through the high school, through the UK secondary school system, you'll find the cliques that are sort of cool. You kind of think, well, actually, they're a bunch of idiots. I don't really want to try and, to compete in their pecking order as who's going to be cheap.
Tony?
Do you see what I mean? I'm sorry for the guy.
No, it's all right. I agree. I likewise, he was liquidated, without a further thought. We've run out of time.
Today's News Talk Radio, TNT.